I think a lot of people do feel like this side of things is a little woo-woo to some extent. And what is your typical response to that when people maybe are a little cynical or unsure of this avenue of healthcare?
Yeah, I think kind of initially it would be, take baby steps. We always want to work from a place of strength. And if there's certainly if a client comes in and I like kind of feel out like where are they at?
Yeah.
And like what are they like open to? What are they like little stitious about? And you're kind of like, all right, let me work like with them. We never want to be like, let's cannonball into the deep end. And the person's like, I never want to go back to that person. They're terrifying or like way too woo-woo for me or whatever. Sometimes I do get clients that are like, I am ready to cannonball and like, let's go like, both feet into the woo. And I'm like, yes, I'm here. Because I do think, as we've really talked about, like there's such a relationship between our physical healing and our emotional healing. I did not start there as a provider at all. And I think, that was part of like my own healing, was to realize that like some of my chronic constipation from an energetic standpoint was me like holding on to like old emotions. And I actually, part of my story in terms of how I unraveled my own health was mold toxicity. And like the energetics of mold toxicity are literally old emotions that need to be like processed in the body. And like I was, having just family history and kind of alcoholism and divorce and like all this stuff and just like trying to like masculine muscle through it of like, I'm fine, the Capricorn, like stubborn, all of that stuff. And it was like so much of the healing was kind of very much physical, yes, but then also the emotional, I think, was what like kind of really took it over to the I don't want to call it the finish line because it's always like maintenance and a journey and all of those things, but really to the place that, I would say I am today. So that is like so much of what I do want to invite in to experiences with clients. But many of them come like in the physical world.
Right.
And then we kind of like slowly bring them into like the kind of emotional world. And I think a lot are surprised at like how overlapping that like Venn diagram becomes when they really start to like allow themselves to explore that. And, am I a therapist? Absolutely not. But more of just the opportunity to kind of get curious and soften a little bit. And I think there's some an empowerment in that idea that like, oh, like I actually have like more power over my physical body through my like consciousness than I've ever allowed myself, like a Joe Dispenza type of approach, which like is another tool in your toolkit. And like, that's pretty cool. It's also,
Absolutely. I do want to talk about that a little bit later. I have a couple questions before we fully uncover that, but we sort of have this concept for you guys today that we want to talk about a little bit, kind of like the duality of our health, but also this time in our lives in our 30s. So we'll put a little pin in that for this second, but I think we should backtrack just for a moment. If this is something that's totally new for anyone listening, I'd love to sort of best we can simplify the biggest differences between what traditional Western medicine is versus functional medicine. So for somebody coming to you who has not heard of this before and this is completely new to them, they're like, okay, what is this all about? How would you break down those differences if you could?
Yeah. I would say, especially where I'm at today as a provider, like when you come into the world of functional medicine, it really should be lifestyle medicine, meaning the provider that you're working with should be asking you, what are you eating? How are you sleeping? What does your energy feel like? Are you drinking water? Like what, like they should be knowing about you and your routines and the timings that your routines happen at and the way you fuel yourself, how you exercise. Like those are the most important foundations. So that's a little bit where, and we talk about this so much on the podcast of, I do see this breaking now in the functional medicine world of this very like protocol supplement driven. And I use supplements in my practice, and we were certainly having conversation of supplements before that, like, and there can be a couple, like handfuls at a time, but we try to not do that. And really, but it's like, so that, but sometimes it's just that. And if you find yourself in the functional medicine field and someone's just throwing protocols and supplements at you and they haven't asked you and supported you in the nutrition and lifestyle, that's where it's kind of like, this is no longer lifestyle medicine. This is just conventional medicine from like medications to supplements. And it's like, okay, so really it's like and so anyone that's curious about this is to like, you could start doing some functional medicine tools in your own daily life of thinking about like, okay, like what, am I eating nourishing food?
Right.
And then am I eating nourishing food in a form of meals 3 times a day or, more than just like once a day or more than just like handful here of things? Am I listening to my body? Like, do I even know how I feel? Am I looking at the ways that our body can interact with us? Like sometimes when I'll tell a client like, all right, like I'm going to ask you all the TMI questions. Like, what does your like poop look like?
Yeah.
And they're like, I don't know. I'm like, what?
You've
like,
never looked?
No, literally. I'm like, it's a 6 vital sign. It's like so much of it. And it's like, what's your, for my female clients, like, what's your period?
Yeah.
Like, is there PMS? Does it come regularly? Like that's a, 6th, 7th, 8th vital sign of all of these things to say like our energy and our sleep quality and like starting to just take a little bit of an understanding of your own body to say like how are those and how do they feel for you? And so that's a little bit of the divide even, amongst the functional medicine field, but conventional medicine seems there's just not enough time for that. And we could go on and on about, some of the shortcomings of the conventional medicine field, but it's there for a reason and it's life-saving and, thank God for it. But when the wellness piece of it, for those of us that are feeling like womp womp, but we're walking around participating in our life, like that's where conventional medicine, like we're not sick enough for conventional medicine.
Yeah.
So if you find yourself in that like womp womp middle of the road, or even just curious, is this as good as it gets? Or if somebody ever tells you that's just aging, like, first of all, run the other way from that person. Like, you do not have fatigue and weight gain in your 30s and 40s just because of age.
Say that louder.
I mean, literally for the people in the back.
Right?
But more of that, like, how do we work with our lifestyle and our nutrition and, how do supplements complement that if we're willing to like and open to exploring those, like those tools that we do every day. That's like what true functional medicine is.
Yeah. In my experience, I feel like it's also just like to your point, the level of curation, individualism, like, when I think of Western traditional medicine, I think of, you get your lab results back and the ranges are quite large a lot of times. And as long as you fall somewhere within that window, you're good. There's nothing to look into any further. Where in functional medicine, they still very much want to look at my labs. It's not like there's no, quote unquote, I say, like legitimate science to it. It's not just about taking walks and eating salads. Like that's not what she's like trying to say. They do look at that stuff too. But it was like, okay, well, you're on the lower end of this range, right? And yes, it might be within normal limits for your age, for your weight, for your height, for what you do for work, literally, like what it boils down to, for your exercise, for how often you exercise, that frequency. Like I'd love to have you a little bit higher, and it's taking it, I think, just that step further to what makes it work well for you, not just what a textbook considers or deems to be okay or appropriate. And there's something that's really, I think, powerful about that and encouraging about that as well, right? Like, because how many times do you go to the doctor and they say, oh, you're fine, but you still walk away feeling crappy, right? You don't feel fine. So when you have that level of attention to detail, there's something that makes you kind of take that sigh of relief. Like, I think I might be able to make progress here. I think I might be able to see some answers. It's just really, really, really refreshing.